The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as 23-year-old James Mitchell adjusted his red uniform jacket for what felt like the 100th time. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened the iconic bearskin hat that made him tower even taller than his already impressive 6-foot frame. Today marked his first official duty as a Queen's Guard, a dream he had chased since childhood. When his grandfather would tell him stories about protecting the royal family, James came from a small mining town in Yorkshire where opportunities were as scarce as sunny days. His father worked double shifts at the local factory, and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. The family lived in a cramped 2-bedroom terraced house where the wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the heating worked only when it felt like cooperating. Despite their struggles, James's parents had always encouraged his ambitions, even when those dreams seemed impossibly grand for a boy from their humble circumstances. The path to becoming a Queen's Guard had been anything but easy. James spent 2 years in basic military training, enduring brutal physical conditioning, learning precise ceremonial movements, and mastering the art of standing perfectly still for hours at a time. He practiced marching until his feet bled, studied royal protocol until he could recite it backwards, and underwent psychological evaluations to ensure he could handle the immense responsibility and public attention that came with the role. His fellow guards had warned him about the tourists. They would try everything to make him break character: silly faces, inappropriate comments, even attempts to touch his uniform or weapon. The training had been clear: maintain composure at all costs, keep eyes forward, and never under any circumstances engage with the public unless there was a genuine security threat. Breaking character could result in immediate dismissal and the end of a military career before it truly began. As James took his position outside the palace gates, he could already see crowds gathering. Cameras flashed constantly, and he could hear snippets of conversation in dozens of different languages. Children pointed excitedly while their parents snapped photos, treating him more like a tourist attraction than a serving soldier, tasked with protecting one of the world's most important buildings. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about standing still and looking impressive in his ceremonial uniform. James was part of an elite unit with real security duties, trained to respond to genuine threats while maintaining the pageantry that millions of people traveled from around the world to witness. Every movement was rehearsed, every response calculated, and every moment potentially under scrutiny from both his commanding officers and the ever-present media. His mind wandered briefly to his girlfriend Sarah, who had driven down from Yorkshire the night before to watch his first day. She was probably somewhere in the crowd right now, beaming with pride and taking photos to send back to his parents. The thought gave him strength, reminding him of everyone who believed in him and had sacrificed to help him reach this moment. The morning progressed smoothly with the usual parade of tourists taking photos and making comments. James maintained his stoic expression, eyes fixed on the distance, breathing steadily through his nose as he had been trained. His feet were already beginning to ache in the heavy black boots, but he pushed the discomfort aside. This was what he had worked for, what he had dreamed of since he was a young boy watching the changing of the guard on television with his grandfather. Little did James know that within hours, his name would be trending across social media platforms throughout Britain and beyond. A single interaction, lasting no more than 30 seconds, would transform him from an anonymous soldier into a viral sensation, sparking debates about respect, tradition, and the treatment of those who serve their country. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything James had been taught about maintaining composure and following protocol. In just a few short hours, a seemingly ordinary day would become anything but ordinary, and a young guard's quick thinking would earn him both praise and criticism from millions of people he would never meet. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and the crowds around Buckingham Palace grew thicker. James had been standing at his post for nearly 3 hours, his muscles aching from maintaining perfect posture, while tourists continued their endless parade of photos and comments. Sweat beaded beneath his heavy bearskin hat, but he remained motionless, a living statue in red and black. Among the crowd, a middle-aged woman named Margaret Thompson pushed through the throng with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. She wore an expensive designer handbag, perfectly styled blonde hair, and the kind of jewelry that suggested comfort rather than struggle. Margaret had grown up in privilege, attended the finest schools, and married a successful businessman who indulged her every whim. She was used to being the center of attention and expected others to accommodate her desires without question. Margaret had brought her teenage daughter, Emma, to London for a shopping trip and decided to include the palace in their tourist itinerary. Emma, however, was far more interested in her phone than the historical significance of their surroundings. She scrolled through social media with the practiced indifference of someone who found most real-world experiences less engaging than the digital realm. As Margaret approached the gate, where James stood guard, she noticed how the other tourists were maintaining a respectful distance, taking their photos from several feet away. This struck her as unnecessarily cautious. After all, she reasoned, these guards were essentially performers, part of the tourist experience that she had paid good money to enjoy through her taxes and tourist spending. The ornate gates of Buckingham Palace framed James perfectly as Margaret pulled out her expensive smartphone, already envisioning the perfect shot to share on her social media accounts. She had thousands of followers who expected regular updates from her various travels and experiences, and a photo with one of the famous Queen's Guards would certainly generate the likes and comments that fed her need for digital validation. Margaret began taking photos from various angles, but none of them satisfied her artistic vision. The other tourists in the background were distracting, and the distance made James appear smaller and less impressive than she wanted. She needed something closer, more personal, more dramatic, the kind of photo that would stand out in a crowded social media landscape where ordinary tourist shots were quickly scrolled past and forgotten. Emma watched her mother's growing frustration with mild amusement. She had seen this behavior countless times during family vacations, her mother's obsession with capturing the perfect image often overshadowing the actual experience itself. The irony wasn't lost on the teenager that her mother criticized her for being too focused on her phone while simultaneously being unable to enjoy any moment without documenting it for digital consumption. Other tourists began to notice Margaret's increasingly bold attempts to get the perfect shot. Some watched with curiosity, others with growing concern as she stepped closer to the guard post than protocol typically allowed. A few whispered among themselves, wondering if someone should say something. But the bystander effect kept them passive observers rather than active participants. James noticed the woman's approach through his peripheral vision, but maintained his forward gaze as training dictated. He had dealt with pushy tourists before, and experience had taught him that most would eventually give up and move along if he simply ignored their attempts to provoke a reaction. The key was patience and unwavering adherence to protocol, no matter how uncomfortable or frustrating the situation became. Margaret's frustration mounted as her perfect photo remained elusive. The other tourists were beginning to stare, and she felt the familiar pressure of being watched and judged. Her daughter's obvious boredom added to her irritation, and the guard's complete indifference to her presence struck her as almost insulting. Didn't he understand that she was trying to appreciate his role and share it with others? The tension in the air was palpable as Margaret prepared to take more direct action to achieve her photographic goals. Several tourists had their own phones out now, not just to photograph the guard, but to capture whatever drama was unfolding before them. In the age of viral videos, everyone was a potential documentarian, ready to record moments that might explode across the internet within hours. James could sense the shift in the crowd's energy, the way conversations had quieted and attention had focused on the woman with the expensive handbag, who was clearly building up to something. His training kicked in, heightening his awareness while maintaining his stoic exterior. Whatever was about to happen, he would handle it with the professionalism and dignity expected of someone wearing the uniform of the Queen's Guard. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything James had learned about protocol, respect, and the delicate balance between serving the public and maintaining the dignity of his position. In the next few moments, a simple tourist interaction would spiral into something much larger, capturing the attention of millions and sparking conversations about entitlement, respect, and the treatment of those who serve their country in very public roles. Margaret's patience had reached its breaking point. After 20 minutes of unsuccessful attempts to capture the perfect photograph, she decided that a more direct approach was necessary. The guard's steadfast refusal to acknowledge her presence felt like a personal insult, and her growing audience of curious tourists only amplified her determination to get the shot she wanted. With the boldness that came from a lifetime of having her way, Margaret stepped closer to James's position than any tourist should reasonably venture. She was now within arm's reach of the imposing guard, close enough to see the individual threads of his red tunic and the slight dampness at his temples from standing in the afternoon sun for hours. Emma looked up from her phone for the first time in an hour, suddenly aware that her mother was about to do something that would probably embarrass them both. She had seen this pattern before during family trips, her mother's entitlement leading to uncomfortable confrontations with service workers, hotel staff, and anyone else who didn't immediately cater to her wishes. The teenager felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. Several tourists began recording with their phones, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The crowd had grown quiet, with conversations dropping to whispers as all attention focused on the well-dressed woman who was clearly preparing to break the unspoken rules that governed interactions with the Queen's guard. Some visitors looked uncomfortable, others excited, but all were transfixed by the unfolding drama. Margaret raised her voice with the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her words cut through the afternoon air with unmistakable authority, and more than a hint of condescension. The phrase that would soon echo across Britain and beyond tumbled from her lips with casual dismissiveness, treating the highly trained soldier as if he were nothing more than a prop for her entertainment. James felt the words hit him like a physical blow. In all his training, through every scenario his instructors had prepared him for, nothing had quite captured the sting of being addressed with such casual disrespect while representing his country and his unit. The woman's tone suggested she viewed him not as a serving soldier with years of training and real security responsibilities, but as a costumed performer whose sole purpose was to facilitate her tourist experience. The crowd's reaction was immediate and varied. Some tourists gasped audibly at Margaret's brazen disrespect, while others pulled out phones to record what they sensed might become a significant moment. A few British onlookers exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the particular brand of entitled behavior that occasionally emerged from certain segments of their society when interacting with those they perceived as beneath their social station. Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. This was worse than her mother's usual demanding behavior with service staff. This was a public humiliation being broadcast to dozens of strangers, many of whom were now actively recording the interaction. She wanted to disappear into the crowd or pretend she didn't know the woman who was making such a spectacle of herself. James's mind raced through his training protocols. Every instinct screamed at him to respond, to defend his dignity and the honor of his uniform, but his conditioning demanded silence and stoic acceptance. The internal struggle was intense, between his personal pride and his professional obligations, between his natural human reactions and the rigid expectations of his role. The weight of his grandfather's stories about military service pressed down on him. Those tales of honor, duty, and representing something greater than oneself suddenly felt very real and immediate. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every soldier who had worn the uniform, every guard who had stood at this post, and every young person from a humble background who had dared to dream of serving their country in such a visible role. The silence stretched on for several long seconds that felt like minutes. Margaret seemed pleased with herself, apparently believing she had successfully asserted her dominance over the situation. She adjusted her position for what she assumed would now be a compliant photo opportunity, completely misreading the tension that was building around her. Other tourists began to murmur among themselves, some expressing disapproval of Margaret's behavior, while others seemed to enjoy the drama. The British visitors in particular appeared uncomfortable with the display, recognizing it as the kind of behavior that reinforced negative stereotypes about entitlement and class consciousness that many preferred to believe were relics of the past. James could feel the eyes of everyone in the crowd upon him. Dozens of phones were now pointed in his direction, ready to capture whatever happened next. His response, or lack thereof, would be documented and potentially shared with thousands or even millions of people within hours. The pressure was immense, but so was the opportunity to stand up for himself and everyone else who had ever been dismissed or diminished while serving others. The moment hung in the air like a held breath, pregnant with possibility and consequence. What happened next would depend on whether a young guard from Yorkshire would choose duty over dignity, or find a way to honor both while teaching an important lesson about respect, service, and the true meaning of wearing a uniform that represented something far greater than any individual's ego or social media ambitions. The silence that followed Margaret's dismissive command stretched for what felt like an eternity. James stood frozen, every muscle in his body tense with the effort of maintaining composure while his mind processed the profound disrespect he had just experienced. The weight of his training warred with his natural human dignity, creating an internal storm that threatened to break through his carefully maintained exterior. Then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, James made a decision that would change everything. Instead of remaining silent or breaking protocol with an angry outburst, he chose a third option that no training manual had explicitly covered, but which drew from the deepest wells of his character and upbringing. Without moving his body or changing his forward gaze, James spoke in a voice that was calm, measured, and carried the weight of absolute conviction. His Yorkshire accent added an authenticity that couldn't be manufactured, and his words cut through the afternoon air with surgical precision. The response was neither aggressive nor submissive, but something far more powerful. It was dignified defiance wrapped in unshakable self-respect. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps echoed across the courtyard as tourists processed what they had just witnessed. Phones that had been recording the interaction now captured the stunned silence that followed James's unexpected response. Margaret stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, clearly unprepared for any scenario where her casual dismissal would be met with such articulate and composed resistance. Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over her. While still embarrassed by her mother's behavior, she found herself unexpectedly impressed by the guard's response. There was something powerful about watching someone stand up for themselves with such grace and intelligence, especially when they had every reason to be angry or hurt. It was a masterclass in dignity that she would remember for years to come. The British tourists in the crowd began to murmur their approval, with several audibly expressing admiration for James's handling of the situation. Comments like "good on him" and "about time someone said something" rippled through the onlookers. The guard had articulated something that many of them had felt but couldn't quite express about respect, service, and the treatment of those who dedicate their lives to serving others. International visitors, while perhaps not fully grasping all the cultural nuances at play, could sense that they had witnessed something significant. The guard's response had transformed what could have been a simple case of tourist rudeness into a moment of genuine human connection and mutual respect. Several began taking photos not of the spectacle, but of James himself, recognizing him as someone worthy of admiration rather than mere curiosity. Margaret's carefully constructed sense of superiority began to crumble as she realized that everyone around her was now looking at her very differently. The approval and validation she had expected for successfully getting the guard's attention had transformed into something much less comfortable. The crowd's energy had shifted decisively against her, and she could feel the judgment of dozens of strangers weighing on her shoulders. James maintained his position, but could sense the profound change in the atmosphere around him. What had started as a typical day of dealing with difficult tourists had become something much more significant. He could feel the support of the crowd, the approval of his fellow Britons, and the weight of representing something larger than himself. His response had struck a chord that resonated far beyond the immediate situation. The moment was being captured from multiple angles by numerous phones, ensuring that this interaction would be preserved and shared far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. Social media algorithms would soon pick up the content, recognizing the emotional engagement and widespread sharing that indicated viral potential. Within hours, James's words would be echoing across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, reaching audiences he could never have imagined. Several tourists approached James's position, not to take selfies or make demands, but to express their respect and admiration for his service. Some simply nodded their approval, others whispered brief words of support, and a few stood quietly, nearby as a show of solidarity with someone who had demonstrated such grace under pressure. The incident had transformed from a simple tourist interaction into a cultural moment that spoke to deeper issues about respect, entitlement, and the treatment of those who serve in public roles. James's response would soon spark conversations in homes, offices, and online communities across Britain and beyond, with people sharing their own experiences of service, work, and the importance of treating everyone with basic human dignity. Margaret began to realize the magnitude of her mistake, as the crowd's disapproval became increasingly apparent. The social media posts she had planned to share about her London adventure would now need to be reconsidered, as any photo from this interaction would be forever associated with her moment of public embarrassment. The viral fame she had unknowingly created would not be the kind that generated the admiration and envy she typically sought from her online followers. Within minutes of the confrontation, the first videos began appearing on social media platforms. A teenage tourist from Manchester had been among the first to start recording, and her TikTok video captured the entire exchange with crystal clarity. The audio quality was perfect, preserving every word of both Margaret's dismissive command and James's dignified response for millions to hear and judge. The video spread like wildfire across British social media. Within the first hour, it had been shared thousands of times, with viewers adding their own commentary about respect, class consciousness, and the treatment of service members. The hashtag that emerged organically from the incident began trending not just in London, but across the entire United Kingdom, with users sharing their own stories of similar encounters and expressing solidarity with James. Traditional media outlets quickly picked up on the viral sensation. BBC News ran the story as part of their evening broadcast, with royal correspondent analyzing the incident within the context of changing attitudes toward the monarchy and military service. Sky News featured interviews with former Queen's Guards who spoke about the challenges of maintaining composure while dealing with difficult tourists and the importance of treating service members with respect. The Times ran an editorial piece about the incident, framing it as a reflection of broader social issues around entitlement and class privilege. The Guardian's coverage focused on the economic pressures that drive young people from working-class backgrounds to seek military careers, and how James's response represented the dignity and intelligence of Britain's service members who are often underestimated or dismissed. Social media users began digging deeper into James's background, discovering his humble origins in Yorkshire and his family's working-class roots. Far from diminishing his stature, these revelations only increased public admiration for his achievement in earning such a prestigious position and handling the confrontation with such grace. His story became a symbol of meritocracy and the possibility of rising above circumstances through dedication and character. Margaret's identity remained largely unknown to the general public, though speculation ran rampant across various social media platforms. Some users claimed to have identified her, leading to heated debates about privacy, public shaming, and the consequences of viral fame. The conversation expanded beyond the original incident to encompass broader questions about accountability in the digital age and the power of social media to both elevate and destroy reputations. Emma found herself in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to her mother and her own sense of right and wrong. The teenager had witnessed the entire incident firsthand and understood the context that many online commenters lacked. But she also recognized that her mother's behavior had been genuinely inappropriate. The experience forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, entitlement, and the way her family sometimes treated others. International media outlets began picking up the story, with American news networks framing it as a quintessentially British moment that revealed both the persistence of class consciousness and the quiet dignity of ordinary people who serve their country. Australian and Canadian broadcasters emphasized the Commonwealth connection and the universal nature of the issues raised by the incident. The viral fame brought unexpected challenges for James. Palace security increased protection around guard positions, recognizing that the guard had become a target for both supporters wanting selfies and potential troublemakers seeking their own viral moments. Military officials faced the delicate task of balancing James's newfound celebrity status with the traditional anonymity expected of Queen's Guards. His family back in Yorkshire was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Local news crews appeared at their modest home, seeking interviews and background information about the young man who had become an overnight sensation. His parents, proud but bewildered, struggled to process how their son's moment of standing up for himself had resonated with so many people across the country and beyond. Sarah, James's girlfriend, found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight as media outlets sought to tell the complete story of the viral guard. Her social media accounts were flooded with friend requests and messages from strangers, forcing her to dramatically increase her privacy settings and reconsider her own digital footprint. The experience gave her new insight into the price of unexpected fame and the way viral moments can transform ordinary people's lives without warning. Military leadership faced internal debates about how to handle the situation. While proud of James's dignified response and the positive attention it brought to the Queen's Guard, they also worried about setting precedents for guards engaging with the public in ways that deviated from traditional protocol. The incident forced a re-examination of training procedures and guidelines for handling increasingly common social media encounters. The incident sparked academic interest as well, with sociology professors using it as a case study in viral culture, class dynamics, and the democratization of media through social platforms. Universities across Britain incorporated the video into coursework about digital communication, social justice, and the intersection of traditional institutions with modern technology. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for James's response, with over 80% of respondents expressing approval for how he handled the situation. The numbers crossed traditional political and demographic lines, suggesting that the incident had touched something universal about dignity, respect, and standing up for oneself while maintaining professional composure. The viral guard had inadvertently become a symbol of values that transcended typical social divisions. The aftermath of James's viral moment created ripple effects that extended far beyond anyone could have anticipated. Within a week, the video had been viewed over 50 million times across various social media platforms, with international news outlets from Japan to Brazil covering the story as an example of dignity in the face of adversity. The simple interaction at Buckingham Palace had evolved into a global conversation about respect, service, and social dynamics. Corporate brands began reaching out to James through military channels, hoping to capitalize on his positive image and widespread appeal. Clothing companies wanted him to endorse their products. Tourism boards sought his participation in campaigns promoting British heritage, and book publishers inquired about his interest in writing a memoir. The commercial opportunities were staggering for someone who had simply been doing his job with integrity and professionalism. However, James faced a complex decision about how to handle his newfound fame. Military regulations strictly controlled commercial endorsements and public appearances by active service members, particularly those in ceremonial roles like the Queen's Guard. The very protocols that had shaped his dignified response to Margaret's disrespect now limited his ability to benefit financially from the positive attention his behavior had generated. His commanding officers found themselves in uncharted territory, dealing with a situation that had no clear precedent in military protocol. While immensely proud of how James had represented the unit and the military as a whole, they also had to consider the implications of guards becoming individual celebrities rather than anonymous symbols of service and duty. The balance between personal recognition and institutional integrity required careful navigation. Margaret's life had taken a dramatically different trajectory. Although her identity had never been officially confirmed, enough circumstantial evidence had emerged online that she found herself the subject of intense scrutiny and criticism. Her social media accounts, once filled with lifestyle photos and vacation snapshots, became battlegrounds for debates about privilege and accountability. The shopping trip to London, that was meant to be a pleasant mother-daughter bonding experience, had become a source of ongoing embarrassment and stress. Emma struggled with the long-term implications of that afternoon at Buckingham Palace. Her mother's behavior had not only embarrassed them both publicly, but had also forced the teenager to confront uncomfortable truths about her family's attitudes and her own complicity in perpetuating systems of entitlement. The incident became a catalyst for difficult but necessary conversations about respect, empathy, and the way they treated others. The viral moment sparked broader discussions about tourist behavior at cultural and historical sites. Other guards, police officers, and service workers began sharing their own stories of disrespectful treatment, creating a movement of solidarity among those who work in public-facing roles. The hashtag associated with James's response became a rallying cry for workers, demanding basic dignity and respect in their interactions with the public. Educational institutions began incorporating the incident into their curricula as a real-world example of effective communication, conflict resolution, and maintaining professionalism under pressure. Business schools analyzed James's response as a masterclass in crisis management and brand protection, while psychology programs examined the incident's viral spread as a case study in social media dynamics and collective behavior. The story reached the attention of members of Parliament, with several MPs using James's example in speeches about supporting military personnel and addressing class-based discrimination. The incident became part of larger political discussions about funding for military families, educational opportunities for service members, and the need to bridge social divides through mutual respect and understanding. James's family experienced both the benefits and challenges of their son's fame. His parents received messages of support from around the world, with many sharing their own stories of children who had served in the military or overcome difficult circumstances to achieve their dreams. However, they also faced unwanted attention, privacy concerns, and the stress of managing requests from media outlets and commercial interests. The incident influenced tourism patterns at Buckingham Palace, with visitor numbers increasing significantly as people hoped to witness similar moments or simply pay respects to the guards they now viewed differently thanks to James's example. Tour guides began incorporating the story into their presentations, using it to explain the real human beings behind the ceremonial uniforms and the dedication required for such roles. Military recruitment saw an unexpected boost in applications, particularly from young people inspired by James's example of serving with dignity and pride. Recruitment officers reported increased interest from candidates who specifically mentioned the viral guard as motivation for pursuing military careers, seeing it as an opportunity to serve their country while maintaining their personal integrity and values. The psychological impact on James himself was profound. While grateful for the support and recognition, he also struggled with the pressure of being viewed as a symbol rather than simply a person doing his job. The weight of representing not just himself but all service members, working-class youth, and anyone who had ever been dismissed or disrespected created a burden he had never anticipated when he first put on the uniform. Media training became a necessity as James learned to navigate interview requests while maintaining military protocol and personal privacy. The skills he had developed for maintaining composure as a guard proved invaluable in handling the intense media attention, though the contexts were vastly different from anything his training had specifically prepared him for. 6 months after the incident that made him famous, James Mitchell stood once again at his post outside Buckingham Palace, but everything had changed while somehow remaining exactly the same. The red uniform was identical, the ceremonial duties unchanged, and the tourists still gathered with their cameras and curious stares. Yet the young man inside the uniform had been fundamentally transformed by his experience with viral fame and the responsibilities it brought. The immediate aftermath of his global recognition had been overwhelming, but James had navigated it with the same quiet dignity that had made him famous in the first place. He had declined most commercial opportunities, choosing instead to use his platform to advocate for military families and support educational programs for underprivileged youth. His decision to remain focused on service rather than celebrity had only increased public admiration for his character. James established a charitable foundation with the help of legal advisors and military liaisons, channeling the goodwill from his viral moment into tangible support for young people from backgrounds similar to his own. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and career guidance for teenagers who dreamed of military service or other forms of public service, but lacked the resources or connections to pursue those goals effectively. His relationship with Sarah had grown stronger through the challenges of unexpected fame. She had chosen to step away from social media entirely during the height of the attention, supporting James privately while avoiding the spotlight herself. Their bond, tested by external pressures and constant public scrutiny, had emerged more solid than ever, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the temporary excitement of celebrity status. Margaret had eventually issued a public apology through a carefully crafted statement released by a public relations firm. While some dismissed it as damage control, others recognized what appeared to be genuine remorse and self-reflection. She had quietly begun volunteering with organizations that supported military families, perhaps seeking redemption or simply trying to make amends for her moment of thoughtless disrespect. Emma had used the incident as motivation for her own personal growth, choosing to study social work at university with a focus on addressing inequality and promoting understanding across social divides. Her mother's behavior had been embarrassing, but it had also opened her eyes to issues of privilege and responsibility that she might never have confronted otherwise. The teenager had transformed her embarrassment into empowerment, using the experience as fuel for positive change. The broader impact of the viral moment continued to reverberate through British society and beyond. Tour guide training programs now included modules on respectful interaction with service members, and several tourist attractions had implemented new guidelines for visitor behavior around working personnel. The incident had sparked a cultural shift in how people thought about the human beings behind ceremonial roles and service positions. Military leadership had updated training protocols to better prepare service members for social media encounters and viral moments, recognizing that the digital age required new skills alongside traditional military discipline. James had been consulted in developing these programs, sharing insights about maintaining professionalism while standing up for personal dignity and institutional respect. The story had become a case study in business schools around the world, analyzed as an example of authentic leadership, crisis management, and the power of genuine character in an age of manufactured celebrity. James's choice to remain true to his values while leveraging his platform for positive change was cited as a model for responsible fame management and social influence. International relations experts noted how the incident had actually enhanced Britain's soft power, showcasing the country's military personnel as intelligent, articulate, and principled individuals rather than mere ceremonial figures. The positive global response to James's handling of the situation had contributed to a more nuanced and favorable international perception of British institutions and values. As James continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, he often reflected on how a single moment of choosing dignity over silence had changed not just his own life, but had sparked conversations and changes that extended far beyond anything he could have imagined. The weight of that responsibility was significant, but he carried it with the same quiet strength that had made him famous in the first place. Tourists still approached his post daily, but the interactions had changed dramatically. Most visitors now showed greater respect and awareness, understanding that the impressive figure in the red uniform was a real person, deserving of courtesy and consideration. Children often asked their parents to explain who the guards were and why they were important, leading to educational moments about service, sacrifice, and civic duty. The viral video continued to circulate online, resurfacing periodically when discussions about respect, service, or social media emerged in public discourse. Each time it reappeared, it brought new viewers who discovered James's story and the values it represented, ensuring that the lesson about dignity and mutual respect reached new audiences across different generations and cultures. James had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is not anger or aggression, but the quiet assertion of one's own worth and humanity. His moment of viral fame had begun with someone trying to diminish him, but it had ultimately elevated not just him, but the very concepts of service, respect, and dignity that his uniform represented. The young guard from Yorkshire had shown the world that true strength comes not from putting others down, but from lifting everyone up through example, grace, and unwavering commitment to doing what is right.